listener production.
Hey, Tara Cassidy with you and welcome to The Briefing. He vanished with his 3 kids and spent nearly 4 years on the run. So how did it all come to a deadly end?
There certainly is a growing swell in New Zealand in social media and on Facebook pages, and particularly the Facebook page that talks about these missing children and bring them home. They say that he's doing his right. He's allowed to care for his children and he's doing it in the way that he understands.
In the second half of this episode, we go inside one of New Zealand's most high-profile missing persons investigations. First though, let's get into the headlines with Chris Budge. It's Tuesday, the 9th of September.
Hey Tara, and to you listening, Tara, welcome back. Aussie kids will be banned from having violent, harmful and sexual conversations with AI chatbots thanks to a world-first online safety reform announced this week. E-Safety Commissioner Julie Inman-Grant says it'll help reduce the amount of harmful content kids come across online, with many as young as 10 and 12 years old spending up to 6 hours a day talking to AI companions, most of them sexualised chatbots.
Yeah, and the changes also hope to prevent kids having conversations with AI around mental health, particularly suicide, after some really concerning stories have come to light from parents around the world who have alleged that AI chatbots led their children to take their lives. Now, while speaking on the ABC, Julie Inman-Grant says another big area of concern is the online sharing of child abuse material, something that she says the major tech companies are well aware of, but are knowingly doing little to stop.
Not a single one of them is doing everything they can to stop the most heinous of abuse, to children being tortured and raped, and this imagery being perpetuated online.
Meanwhile, a tech company in the UK has also been threatened with a hefty nearly $50 million fine if it doesn't act on its Nudify site, which the e-safety head says is being used by up to 100,000 Aussie kids to make deepfake nudes of schoolmates and others a month. Now, this reform, including 6 new codes hoping to tackle these issues, is being registered as part of the Online Safety Act this week.
Yeah, and I think this is good news if you ask me, especially when you hear about those issues that we were just talking about. There's obviously positives to AI and it can be a really great resource, but I do think all too often we bring in these rules and legislation and restrictions after we've found out what the big problems are, Chris. And, you know, it's already had fatal consequences. We've seen that. So I think too often we let the tech get ahead of us, and I do think it's really good that we're doing this now and not later.
The Victorian Premier has ordered crisis talks with the South Sudanese community west of Melbourne after 2 children aged just 12 and 15 were stabbed to death while walking home from a bus stop over the weekend. Police say the children were attacked by a group of 8 masked individuals at Cobblebank on Saturday night in a likely case of mistaken identity, with the children's families since pleading for police and government action, saying their loved ones were just regular kids, not gang members or criminals.
In a statement released last night, Jacinta Allens labelled the attacks senseless and announced a new expert working group, the South Sudanese Australian Youth Justice Expert Working Group, which she says will include 2 government ministers and Victoria Police. Now, the goal of the group, she says, is to, quote, fight against the cancer of youth gang crime that's breaking the community's heart. Now, meanwhile, Victoria's Chief Police Commissioner Mike Bush has also since responded to the Premier's statement, and he says that he thinks even more than that needs to be done.
Yeah, and this comes as the state is already a week into the government's new machete ban. He says that the state needs harsher penalties for violent crimes, particularly those with weapons, saying the current ones are not in line with community expectations.
To the US, where the federal trial for the man accused of trying to assassinate Donald Trump at his Florida golf course last year has begun. 59-year-old Ryan Routh, who's facing 5 charges, including the attempted assassination of a major presidential candidate, has opted to fire his legal team and defend himself in court, despite not being a lawyer. He's pled not guilty to all charges.
Yeah, jury selection is underway with opening statements expected later this week. Prosecutors will allege allege the former construction worker planned the attack for months, camping at Trump's West Palm Beach golf course with a rifle on September 15 before a Secret Service agent spotted him and opened fire, causing him to flee before he was later arrested. They will also allege he penned a letter addressed Dear World that stated, quote, "This was an assassination attempt on Donald Trump, but I failed you." The trial is scheduled to take 2 to 4 weeks, and for anyone listening where this is feeling a little bit like Groundhog Day, this is that separate incident that occurred weeks after a bullet grazed the president's ear in another assassination attempt at a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania.
The hunt for alleged double murderer Dezi Freeman today enters its 3rd week after thousands of mourners have farewelled one of the officers he allegedly shot dead in Victoria's high country. 59-year-old officer Neil Thompson was laid to rest in Melbourne yesterday, surrounded by family, friends and fellow officers after being gunned down while serving a warrant in Pawnpukka. The detective leading senior constable served on the force for 38 years and was actually due to retire last Friday. And he's being remembered as a generous and kind-hearted man.
He would run through a brick wall to help you, give you the shirt off his back. I could hear him saying, "You wouldn't get the Prime Minister at your funeral, Junior."
Among those who attended his funeral was the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, and Victorian Premier Jacinta Allen. He was yesterday given a Police Guard of Honour and was awarded the Victoria Police Star, the same medal given to his fellow slain officer Vadim Devat Hodder. The hunt for the accused killer continues with more than 100 properties searched and a $1 million reward offered for anyone with information leading to his arrest.
And she's a 2-time Olympian, FIFA World Cup player, Young Women's Footballer of the Year, and now a runway model.
Ooh.
Woohoo! Is there anything our beloved Matilda's superstar Mary Fowler can't do, Chris?
Yeah, this month she'll be joining the likes of Kendall Jenner and Jane Fonda in Paris for a high-end fashion event and will make history as the first footballer to ever walk the L'Oreal runway.
Ooh.
See you on the runway.
Now that was Fowler looking glam and dressed to the nines for an ad about the upcoming event set to take place on September 29, which Mary said will be a mind-blowing experience for her.
Yeah, mind-blowing indeed. That's so cool. And she's absolutely gorgeous. I can see why they've picked her. I reckon I'll give it a watch, Chris. What about you? It's pretty cool to see our athletes, shine on a different world stage.
Yeah, I'm one of these people that absolutely loves people doing lane switching. I'm all for it. If Mary Fowler were to come out with a cookbook tomorrow, Tara Cassidy, I'm buying it. I am buying whatever the Tillies are selling. Look, welcome back, Tara. Welcome back from your honeymoon.
Thank you.
That brings our headlines to a close for today. Coming up next is our deep dive looking into New Zealand fugitive Tom Phillips. He was on the run for almost 4 years with his 3 kids, and that all came to a crashing end yesterday. Stick around, that deep dive is coming up for you next. After 4 years on the run with his 3 children in New Zealand, fugitive father Tom Phillips was shot dead by police yesterday. Authorities say they were responding to an armed robbery and were trying to apprehend Phillips, who was on a quad bike with one of his children when the fatal shootout took place south of Auckland. The child with Phillips was unharmed and assisted police locate their 2 remaining siblings in a remote bush camp later in the afternoon.
I can confirm that the children are well and uninjured.
Chris Budge is a private investigator from New Zealand who's been looking into the case. Here's his chat with Natarsha Belling.
Chris, thanks so much for joining us. Just recap, who is Tom Phillips?
Tom Phillips is a person who lives in what we call Maricopa area. So that's in sort of like the central Waikato area of the North Island of New Zealand, out towards the west on the west coast. He is a family man and big part of a family that's been there for a number of years. In September 2021, things weren't going terribly well for Tom in the family front. So he absconded with his 3 children. His Land Cruiser vehicle was found on the mud flaps out on the coast, and there was a belief that there could have been an accident or perhaps self-harm to the children and himself. A few weeks later, he appeared out of the bush. And there's not much public information around that. The kids were taken into care by their grandparents. Police were speaking to Tom. And then before Christmas in 2021, Tom went missing again. And he's only been seen in the various media shots over the last, coming up to 4 years now.
So in regards to what's happened recently, Chris, we understand Tom Phillips was on the run for 4 years before these latest developments, correct?
That's correct, yes. So, a big part of that, certainly in New Zealand and around the world, is how on earth could you stay hidden in an area that's not much bigger than one of your states in Australia? It's a fairly closed-in area, about 50 square kilometres of dense bush and farmland that travels their way through. So for the first couple of years, I believe, and I was quite critical around this, is that the police believed it was a family court matter. So they kind of stepped back a little bit, whilst there were some kids potentially in harm, and my quoting was that a parent had abducted their children against the wills of the wider family and away from their mother. That went on for a couple of years, and then lo and behold, it was accused that he robbed a bank in Te Awamutu, which is a little bit more into the central hinterland, closer to Ruapehu, where the mountain is. And there were two people that robbed the bank, got away on a motorcycle, and a firearm was discharged. At that time, of course, it then became a larger criminal matter, and the police then heightened up their efforts. Once again, from then, there's been a couple of sightings of Tom and the children. So firstly, there was a sighting where Tom and the three kids were seen walking across some farmland in central Maricopa, so just off the coast. They were interrupted by a couple of teenage pig hunters and said, "Hey guys, how are you?" The kids looked okay, and they just sort of walked off into the hunter. Police arrived maybe a couple of hours later, not located. Then there was a sighting at the dairy that about a year or so ago, and then there was another sighting a month or so ago again at the same dairy, which would have hit the news, where they broke in and they stole just some 2-litre bottles of milk. It looked like Tom and one of the children. And then what happened last night, or the early hours of this morning, about 2:30 a.m., the police have reported that a vehicle and a break-in was seen at one of our big farmlands type buildings, warehouse area. The police gave chase. Because they knew that a quad bike was involved and that there were two people on the quad bike, they rightly assessed that it's quite likely to be Tom Phillips because it's the same area. They deployed some staff. They deployed the Sharpie things across the road. The quad bike went across it, crashed into the drain a little bit while on. The first police officer was, as he was getting out of his motor vehicle, he was shot in the head by the person that was behind the quad bike. Moments later, another police car arrived, and it's been reported that the shooter was fatally shot. They gave first aid at the scene. Our rescue helicopter was called in. Unfortunately, it's been reported that he died on the scene. They did take a female child away from the scene, and they were seen in the back of a car. And it wasn't until a police media briefing the mid-morning they announced that Tom Phillips was the deceased, that one of the children was taken, but they have not advised what the children is. The police officer who was shot is in hospital under operations to his head, and beyond that, there was no further details disclosed.
Chris, obviously this was a very high-profile case. May I ask you, how did Tom Phillips and his children stay hiding for 4 years and evade authorities?
That's the $94 question. And to be fair, anything that either the police, myself, or any other commenters might come up with is that I don't believe that he was in the bush for 4 years, maybe early in September when he first disappeared, and maybe for a little while afterwards. But since that time, I have a belief that they've been helped by some people, whether they're honest people or not. There certainly is a growing swell in New Zealand in social media and on Facebook pages, and particularly the Facebook page that talks about these missing children and bring them home. They say that he's doing his right. He's allowed to care for his children, and he's doing it in the way that he understands. They compare it with a lot of, like, maybe in Australia it'd be outback families. In New Zealand it's East Coast or coastal families where there isn't TV and there's no real form school, etc. So people saying, what's the difference from that? Well, the big difference is these kids don't have any social interaction with other children of their age. The eldest girl and the middle girl, they were around 8 and 6. They're now 12 and 10 or thereabouts. They're well and truly into their growth into womanhood. One would presume that they don't have any assistance in that regard, let alone the sanitary items that they would need. So there's all that side of it as it concerned. However, we bring around and say that, well, if they've been helped by somebody, then maybe that connection's there. Now, I think in that area there are a lot of hunters' huts. There's farmland, quite big farms that have shepherd's hut out the back, and also hay buildings and all that sort of stuff around the area. So there is a potential that he's been jumping between locations when anybody's come into the area, and they're in some form of structure. They look well fed. Certainly the kid we see on recent CCTV outside the dairy, the children are walking up and down the street. They don't look malnutritious. Tom certainly looks very calm. And of course, but there's then questions. So like they only took 2-litre bottles of milk. I mean, what's that about? So what happens next is, of course, is the big question. Firstly, I think as ordinary human beings, we absolutely have condolences for Tom's family, because I guarantee this is not the outcome that anybody in the know or the police would ever want to come close to.
Chris, in regards to what's happening here in Australia at the moment, I'm sure you're across this massive story in regional Victoria where we know this alleged gunman that allegedly shot dead 2 police officers. Dezi Freeman is his name, the alleged offender. He's on the run right now.
Yes.
He was known to be anti-government, anti-authority,
Yes.
Allegations he was what they call a sovereign citizen. We've seen a huge increase in that community, which is very, very much radicalised online. Does this sound almost very similar to what is happening there in New Zealand with Tom Phillips?
I think if we talk about the escape and evasion side, I would say it's similar. If we talk about the constitutional issues around sovereignty, no, I don't. I think that's a completely different aspect, particularly around what's come out of the states, and you're a much bigger country with independent states and a central government, and there's some really wild people that have ideas. Not that we don't have that in New Zealand. There's a gentleman by the name of Calvin Alp. There's others. We've had the mosque killings a number of years ago. You know, there are those radicals that are there. But I don't think this is really those circumstances. I think this is absolutely family-oriented. And the reason I say that is 6 months after Tom went missing, I actually wrote a letter and took it up to Tom's father, Neville. And I presented that to him and said, hey, I've got no skin in the game. I would really like this to come to a successful end. If I can help in any way, here's my name and number. I don't mind acting as an intermediary. The father responded to me by saying, Tom will not come out. So on that basis, I think it's more family court-oriented rather than some ideas of radical individuals.
We really appreciate you joining us to update us on this developing situation. Chris, thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
That was New Zealand private investigator Chris Budge. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Briefing. Please share this with someone if you think they may enjoy the episode. You can also check us out on your socials, on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast, and on TikTok and YouTube. Search Listener Newsroom, LISTNR. I'm Natarsha Belling, and I'll be back later today with the afternoon edition.